Hey, all you beautiful ethic cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our workplace can fix our world, I got a real treat for you today. We're talking about tariff turbulence, how to navigate the tariff landscape in 2025, because boy, has that been changing a lot. As we get started here, if it's your first time on the Ethicsverse, this is the place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you are interested in expanding your mind, learning more, or getting free credits. So we give out free credits every single week, sometimes multiple times per week when we do our special Tuesday episodes for the Compliance Certification Board, for SHRM, or for HRCI. So you definitely want to subscribe to the Ethicsverse so you can get the slides, so you can get all these credits sent to you automatically. As we get started and we run through our announcements, please drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. Like we say every single week, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. So the best thing that you can do is take advantage of this phenomenal community that we're all a part of. The ethics and compliance and legal and HR community is something that is very unique. Most other departments in your organization don't have something like this, where you can reach out across the aisle to a literal competitor. And because you are both fighting the same battle of building a authentic culture of integrity, you can really save some time from reinventing the wheel. You get no bonus points for reinventing the wheel. Also, you'll notice on your console that we have some new links there. There is a link for the Ethico library. We added a bunch of new books there. So of course, anytime you win a book on the world famous Ethico book giveaway, you can pick from any of those books in the library, and all those should be on your bookshelf, if for nothing else, to make people think that you're smart and that you've read them. Me and Tom Fox are doing a really cool series on AI, upping your game with AI. And this is not scratching the surface. We're diving deep into different aspects of a corporate compliance program, how AI can be leveraged. So if you have not checked that out, add it to your playlist on YouTube, because there's a lot of great stuff on there. And I will remind you, like I do every week, me and Tom are a great team. You probably can't see it right now, but we won an award last year, the W3 Awards. And so we are bringing that back to talk about AI. And Compliance Week is coming up before you know it. We had a great session a week ago with Cara Novelli, and we talked a lot about how to really make a massive impact and influence a lot of the behavior inside your organization by leveraging Compliance Week, even if you don't have a lot of budget. So you want to check that out on our YouTube channel, which you should like and subscribe and hit that little button in case you want to hear when new things drop. We're putting out new content all the time. But if you missed that and you haven't gotten this book yet, we're going to be pushing today. The free book is Level Up by Mary Shirley. And this book is awesome. You can open it up to any page and find some great tips on how to improve your program. And she has an entire chapter, an entire section on that Compliance Week thing. So now is the time. Also want to talk about this thing of program effectiveness. So a lot of us it keeps us up at night wondering if our program is effective, and effectiveness in our program and data-driven decisions are no longer a suggestion. DOJ's guidance is becoming more and more explicit around this. And we've recently built a really cool tool that's gotten a lot of feedback from the market that really lets you put your entire, I'm talking about our risk assessment tool. It's a dynamic tool, which I'll show you a little commercial for here in a sec, but it allows you to get much quicker feedback loops on specific risks inside your organization. Our job is really, because work fills the available time, our job is really to make good bets with our time. And when we can get better insights into points of risk throughout our organization and allocate those limited resources to the things that matter most, we can really sleep well at night. And that's what it's all about, right? So check out this thing. And we got a great special this quarter on the risk assessment tool.
Okay, risk assessment season, let's get started. So I'm going to need Google Forms, spreadsheets, emails, calendar.
Introducing Ethico's new risk assessment module, your one-stop solution for managing organizational risk. Our intuitive platform streamlines the entire risk assessment lifecycle. Create customized assessments with our drag-and-drop interface, distribute assessments with secure magic links, and boost completion rates with automated reminders and real-time monitoring. Transform raw data into actionable insights with dynamic heat maps and visual risk matrices. Drill down into critical risk areas requiring immediate attention across your organization. The new risk assessment module for MySIM. Reach out to your client success manager to learn more.
So we're hitting this inflection point in our industry where the next 10 years can look a lot different from the last 10 years, but that's going to be kind of contingent on us showing up in a different way, showing up as business people. And all business people that are successful are in a continuous improvement mode, but you can't be in a continuous improvement mode if you're not in a continual risk assessment mode. So this tool is great. A lot of great response from it. And we are the best ethics and compliance software in the world. Not my words, not my mom's words. These are your words. So if you're thinking about making a change, or you have, if the love is gone with your current vendor, check out G2, where there's tons of verified, responses from verified users of the Ethico system. And you can also take advantage of our special for our risk assessment launch, up to 50% off this quarter. Okay, with that, we are 1 week away from the best day of your life. Ethics First Day 2.0 is coming up. This is going to be a day of 4 phenomenal sessions. We got a ton of great speakers. Our first session is all about whistleblowers and getting into the mind of the whistleblower. And we have 3 of the most famous whistleblowers in history, including the one and only Sharon Watkins, who took down Enron. Okay, she was single-handedly responsible for Sarbanes-Oxley. So look at this phenomenal preview and start circling your calendars. We want to see you there next week.
On July 24th, the one-day learning event of the summer is returning to a computer screen near you. Ethics Verse Day is back and better than ever. An all-day virtual event packed with guidance from leaders in the ethics and compliance space. 4 epic sessions over 12 CEUs and insights from industry leaders such as, for Session 1, Tom Tipper X Harden, Ellen Coons, Mary Inman, and Sharon Watkins. For Session 2, Matt Kelly, Andrew McBride, and Reed Blackman. For Session 3, Leah Simonton, Scott Hogan, and Matt Axelrod. And this year, we've included a bonus session with Hema Lomax. Don't miss out on the grand return of this prestigious event. July 24th. Register now at ethico.com.
It's going to be wild. All right, so sign up for that thing. We want to break some records this year. We're going to be giving away tons of prize packs. We're going to be giving away tons of books. And it is going to be a phenomenal day that you do not want to miss. Okay, with that, I am passing it over to the one and only coolest guy in compliance, Matt Kelly. If you don't follow Radical Compliance, you absolutely should go there right now and at least sign up for the newsletter. So much great thought leadership coming out from Matt. If I ever say something smart, odds are I probably stole it from one of Matt's articles. Matt, how's it going, buddy?
It is going very well, Nick. Thank you for the kind introduction. And welcome, everybody, to today's session. We are here to talk about tariffs, and we have a big lineup of guest speakers to help us out. So I will introduce them momentarily, but we are going to talk a bit about why the tariff regime in the Trump administration now is so different than what we've expected before. We are going to talk about how compliance teams will need to think through what's the right way to respond to these new tariff enforcement concerns, risks. Do we even understand exactly what that will look like? And we are not necessarily going to talk about any specific tariff rates or specific countries, mostly because I still am not even sure what the rates are for what countries. It seems to change from hour to hour. We don't know. But clearly, tariffs are here to stay. It's going to be a thing companies are going to have to deal with and figure out. That's what we want to cover here today. So our speakers are, first, we have 3 guest panelists instead of the usual 2, so it's going to be an even more robust discussion. First is Mike Hunnicky. He is a partner in the law firm Hughes, Hubbard, and Reed. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here, Matt.
And second is another lawyer, Angela Gamalski. Angela is a partner at the law firm of Honigman Partners, where she also works on tariff and trade issues. Angela, welcome.
Thank you so much.
And also, last but not least, Bobby Butler, who is a global compliance counsel, the global compliance counsel at Indorama Ventures, which, Bobby, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys make petrochemical, like plastic resins that we might see in water bottles or other goods like that. And you're, I don't know, a producer and importer, but you also have a lot of tariff concerns at Indorama as well, right?
That's right. And our polyester fibers go into lifestyle products, hygiene products, even in the motorized, tire space and airbag space. It's quite a bit of where our resins and products or semi-finished goods end up. So thank you.
All right. So we have our 2 law firm people willing to give us the bigger perspective of what's going on. We have Bobby, who is going to be able to talk a bit about how his company thinks through tariff concerns and what is he thinking about? What does he talk to his board and senior management about on this issue? And Nick and I can then run cleanup, keeping an eye on all of the comments from the attendees. Of course, attendees, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into that chat or any comments or anything else, and we will try and put them to our speakers as quickly as we can. So with that introduction, I just want to start by asking probably our two law firm lawyers first, maybe Mike first and then Angela. Why are we worrying about tariffs now as opposed to worrying about tariffs in the past? They are not a new idea. There have been tariffs for years and years, and even in the Biden administration, they were using tariffs more liberally. But what makes what the Trump 2.0 administration is doing with tariffs, what makes this bigger and more complicated for us to understand? Mike, I'll start with you, and then Angela, like, what's going on?
Sure. Well, anytime the lawyers are multiplying and there's two of us instead of one, things are probably worse for everyone involved. And I'll just say real quick, I want to give a shout out to all the Ohioans in the chat. I'm sitting in DC today, but I don't think I've ever seen so many people pop up from Ohio in the chat. So I'm from Columbus. Great to see you guys and obviously everyone else here. Look, Matt, tariffs have been around for a long time, but really weren't this pressure point because they were kind of boring, kind of the same, kind of low, right? We're in this world where if you go back to the Clinton administration, the U.S. view of what best served its national security was integrated trade around the world. And that meant lowering tariff barriers and bringing people into consensus-based dispute resolution mechanisms, for example. Now, everything is volatile. And let's, we should date and timestamp, as I'm in the habit of doing now. It's July 17th at 12 p.m. Eastern time, where I am in case this changes during the course of the recording. But you have the classic fraud triangle coming into play here, Matt. Pressure, opportunity, and then leads to rationalization. People are facing existential crises in their companies. If you're a U.S. importer and you cannot find a suitable domestic alternative for something you've been sourcing from a country that for a up and down, now and then, whatever period of time is getting massive tariffs threatened, imposed on it, you might be going out of business or feel like you have the risk of going out of business. You're going to be at least open to ideas or suggestions, including from your suppliers, about ways to work around this or ways to adapt. And we'll talk about good ideas and bad ideas later. But it's obviously a huge pressure point for the business and the operations, and by extension, anyone dealing with ethics and compliance right now.
Okay. Angela, what's your take on what makes this substantively different now than we have encountered in the past?
Well, thank you. And I also want to add that I'm calling in from Ann Arbor, Michigan, as a probably the counterpoint to Michael being from Columbus.
Ooh, we should see some real battle today.
Yeah.
The
Just the state up north. I don't know. Yeah.
Oh boy.
But my view on this really comes to first the countries that are being attacked here by tariffs. It's not just China, which we saw in the first Trump administration. This is just a much more expansive view, and that's challenge number one: the pace of these announcements, where they're coming out with a few days warning to no time at all for companies to be able to develop an action plan to prepare. And then the numbers that we're seeing here, much as Michael said, in the past, tariffs were a single-digit percentage issue, and now you're looking at products going from 25% to 125% or more overnight. And then finally, I think the biggest other issue is the lack of exceptions. In the first administration, there were opportunities to petition to say, I don't have a domestic source, I have some sort of unique product, and you could eventually get blessing for your supply chain and help U.S. companies that were importing goods be able to sidestep some of the pain and pressure the administration was placing on its tariff targets at that point. This time around, the administration has said there's no exceptions. We're not going through the administrative process. This is across the board, a much more hardline approach. which means the escape hatches that you had in 2019 and 2020, those doors are gone.
Mm. And then, Bobby, let me pivot to you and what you and Indorama are thinking about. I know you can talk about this more, but I know you're one of the few companies out there who were, you're at least thinking in your particular case, tariffs are not bad because there may be some competitive concerns there. But how do you look at what's happening about tariffs? How do you try and figure out what position this might put your company in, what you'll need to think through for compliance capabilities? Like, what does it look like from your perspective at Indorama?
Well, Matt, one of the things that from a company or corporate perspective, it has gone all the way to our owner, our board. So it's grabbed their attention, and we've set up a tariff war room team. So there's a lot of more attention than I've seen, given to any import or trade compliance perspective. The 2 HTS numbers for PET, the resin, that all these plastics and polyester fibers, it made it onto Annex 2, so the exemption list. And so other base chemicals were off the exemption list and are taxed or have a duty against them. So we are actively lobbying both the White House through Navarro's office. We're actively lobbying members of Congress to get PET off the exempt list, because we have Asian competitors, for example, dumping cheap resin into the U.S., impacting domestic producers, jobs, and so forth. So we do take it from a different perspective because PET ended up on the Annex 2 exempt list. Prior to the administration and their active tariff and trade deal negotiation, we were actively pursuing anti-dumping cases. That was a big focus. And how do we get these annual reviews with the Commerce Department, the ITC? So this just enhanced that focus and trying to hopefully correct a wrong, which was this main byproduct or main raw material getting on Annex 2 being exempt.
Mm-hmm. So one question I've been struggling with, and I think maybe a lot of listeners would be wondering this too, is I'm still stuck on, if you're a large global company, you're importing and you're exporting this and that, and you might have a lot of domestic consumption as well. Like, who is supposed to own tariff compliance now when it's so complex? Because I historically thought, well, tariffs are a tax. They're not a big tax. I guess that means Fred in the tax function, he takes care of it. But I don't think it's that anymore. And I'm not sure, is this a documentation challenge that compliance officers need to think about? Is it a supply chain challenge? You want to rearrange where you're sourcing? That sounds like a procurement function. It's still also a tax. So I assume Fred in tax the department, he's still around there somewhere. So I don't know who is supposed to even own this to start to think about worrying it. Maybe Mike and Angela, I'll ask you both to take your takes on it, and then Bobby and Nick, how you see how this fits. But Mike first, and then Angela, like, who's supposed to be in charge of this at a big company now?
Well, the challenge is if it's everybody, sometimes that means nobody, right? And so trying to, house this in the right place, the punt is to say, well, it depends on your internal politics and your culture and organization, wherever you think it might be best. It reminds me, Matt, of anti-corruption compliance 20 years ago, where you did see it sometimes in finance, sometimes in legal, sometimes there was a new ethics thing. As that enforcement kicked up, I think there was a trend to have that move more and more into legal and ethics, or ethics and compliance, whatever you might call it. I think for good reason. It's not typically an ethics and compliance thing. It's more of a, I see a lot of global supply management, logistics, sometimes customer service, or the different organizations within it. Obviously, the important thing is that if you aren't sure who it is, everyone's best served by sitting down and figuring out who it is. And really, the fewer people that are responsible for it, the better you're going to have in terms of accountability. But then those people need to have the resources and authority and respect to be able to make decisions based on that.
I notice as soon as you say they need to have authority, suddenly you see waves of emojis and a thumbs up and applause.
Yeah.
What a coincidence. Angela, what would you say about how the clients you deal with or the companies you see, like, how are they trying to figure this out?
I mean, this has suddenly become an executive level issue. I think, as Bobby said, his company has a war room, and it's become elevated to an executive level function because of the dollar amounts you have at stake here. And these are big numbers. Mm-hmm. So from there, I see tariffs sitting somewhere between legal and finance, or legal and finance together, because you've got the dollar and cents calculations, but it's also understanding that there are a lot of legal obligations and legal touch points that are happening when you are importing goods, and it's giving GCs a new insight into what has previously been a pretty routine low-level company function of getting customs brokers on board and getting goods into the door.
Maybe I'll piggyback right off of that, Matt. It's a great point, Angela. If anyone on the webinar here is working for a company that's under Delaware law, that you're organized under Delaware law, or you're in a state that basically follows Delaware law on, boards of directors and executive management fiduciary duties, it might be the type of thing that now rises to its essential compliance risk. If you look back at the McDonald's decisions from early 2023, and obviously I was on a different topic, in those decisions where something becomes a central compliance risk, both the board and the C-suite have a duty. And it's a part of the duty of loyalty, not the duty of care, which has important implications potentially for D&O insurance and whether the business judgment rule applies, to make sure that the compliance program is reasonably designed to prevent violations of law and that there's a reasonable process for responding to red flags. So, it may be a delicate question to raise, maybe an unwelcome question to raise, but if you're on this webinar and you're feeling that people aren't taking the risk seriously enough, you might be able to leverage some Delaware law to help you out.
Okay. So then, Bobby, let me pivot to you next about, I guess, who owns tariff compliance at Indorama? And if it's you, or even if it's somebody else, like, what do you actually own? And then, Nick, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how compliance teams can try and figure out what their role is to play here.
Let me first start, Matt, by 22 years ago, when I got into the compliance world. It first started with export controls, economic sanctions, and anti-boycott, because import compliance was in tax at the company where I started. Mm-hmm. And so they were separate. Again, we've tried to bring this together so we can break down some silos. I'm the subject matter expert, but it is, because of our tariff war room team, it is members of finance, government affairs, supply chain, procurement, all the leaders of these different groups. It's a bit of groupthink. So I appreciated if it's everybody, it's probably nobody. But in our company, I'm the subject matter expert, but we have others that have to go out and make it happen from an operational perspective, even including the customs broker and the freight forwarder at times are involved because they're a partner, a third party partner. But it's not one person, but they do come when it comes to legal advice, they're coming to me as that point person. But there's a few others operationally as they have to deal with these monthly, weekly inbound import customs clearance issues that are handled by the supply chain.
So, Nick, what do you think here about how compliance officers are supposed to try and digest this or think about this? I mean, Bobby's right. This is not the first time an issue has come along where, you need to try and incorporate it somehow. Export controls, anti-corruption. I think it was Mike maybe had mentioned that too. But, I mean, this is not the first time compliance officers are going to be faced with a new thing saying, figure out what role I'm supposed to play. Like, what sort of, I don't know, Nick, what do you think about all that?
I just think, I say this often, but anytime there's change, there's opportunity and change. And to the extent that you feel like you're at that kiddie table, this is a great opportunity, depending on your business model and the extent to which you're relying on imports as inputs in whatever product you are developing, to take advantage of this change and add some more value to the business. Us getting to the grown folks table, so to speak, is not just pulling a chair up, for the sake of it, but it's pulling a chair up to that table because we're adding more value. And with all of this added complexity, as Bobby was saying, there's an opportunity to be that SME and be part of this cross-functional team that requires de-siloing and, being part of that conversation. I mean, this cross-functionality, the de-siloing, the need for actual integration and coordination across diverse sets of, representatives from different departments in the organization is, to your point, it's nothing new. This happens all the time and, throughout all of our companies. And I think we always need to be looking for opportunities to add more value to the business. If that's our goal, our minds will automatically sort of find opportunities to exert that expertise and be a bigger part of the conversation. But with all this volatility, I mean, what is volatility at the end of the day? Volatility is risk. Like if you look in finance, you look at a portfolio, we quantify that volatility as risk. And this added volatility, this added risk presents an opportunity for us to, again, help de-risk our organization because we have a unique perspective, something that maybe that third-party broker who doesn't really own that sort of legal liability as the, the company of record, or that, procurement just really has like one piece of the puzzle on. We can be that sort of circulatory system, that sort of like sinew that connects these different pieces of the body and, again, bring that expertise, as Bobby was saying.
If I could jump back in, Matt, one of, I was at ground zero with an oil field service company in 2006 when the DOJ started enforcement against 12 companies after the Kay and Murphy writ was denied by the Supreme Court. That's when the DOJ would hit companies, resources became available because enforcement was serious. People were potentially going to jail. These fines were astronomical because at the same time we had a parallel export control investigation and the fine wasn't as much. And the unfortunate thing is that companies have to throw resources towards enforcement. It is good that DOJ, Treasury, Commerce kind of came out with, here are the elements of an effective compliance program collectively. They did that. And then right now, a lot of resources are being thrown at this issue that 6-8 months ago wouldn't have had that. You wouldn't have that same conversation because now they're looking at False Claim Act enforcement that we can talk about.
Exactly.
So I do want to get to what enforcement of this will look like. But first, I'm still stuck on exactly what are the compliance risks that are most likely going to trip up a company. And I don't know if that is poor documentation of what you're importing. Are you over-relying on a third party when you shouldn't? Are there poor policies or procedures that are a bad habit we need to break? And I'm not clear on what's the thing that could cause pain that compliance officers will need to start to tighten up. So maybe I'll go back to my lawyers, Angela first, and then Mike. Like, what would you say are the big? Are you got Angela?
So all of the above, Matt, and especially for the small and mid-sized. So it's documentation at the end of the day. Documentation, and it's going to be an especially big challenge for the small businesses where the compliance team has been multi-hatted, or one person is compliance and legal and accounting. I mean, you can end up where if a company is going to have challenges where if they didn't have the resources and knowledge before March of 2025, you could find yourself in a world of hurt for a few reasons. First, U.S. Customs has a 5-year look-back period. So there's a 5-year statute of limitations. And every time those goods are coming through a border, you are declaring a number of things about the goods. And you may have a customs broker who's working with your company and filing the paperwork for you, but it's all going to come back to you, the importer, at the end of the day. So companies have to declare the country of origin of the goods, the tariff classification of the goods, and be able to provide a description of the goods. So you may be seeing, or what I'm seeing, are companies realizing that they've been maybe not declaring goods under the right tariff code to begin with. They may have been looking at, where's this coming from? Well, the last shipment point is Taiwan, but was it really Taiwan origin or was it China origin? And then the last thing to think about is valuation, which is where actually declaring the correct value of the goods. And what that is, if you're in a multinational company with, you're a subsidiary or affiliate overseas who's making the good, you might have some challenges about what you're actually declaring that value of the good is. And those are the three ways, really three key elements of tariffs. And so it's not just what the rate is that becomes a problem. It's, do you have the right rate? Do you have the right rate for this country? And then all of that rate depends on the value of the product. So if you're not following the 200 some years of customs laws that apply to all of those things, you could find yourself now really in a bad enforcement scenario with not a lot of good options on the table.
So right off the bat, I'm thinking that it's going to be a big data management challenge, tracking what these tariff rates actually are. Internal data, do you actually know the transfer pricing between one division or another, if it's a global subsidiary that's selling you goods into the country or something like that? Seems like there's going to be an awful lot of data management headaches there. Mike, what would you say about what the big tariff compliance risks are, like either things you've seen your client companies struggle with, or what you think are going to be pitfalls that companies might trip into? What would you say?
Well, I think Angela covered a lot of it. Let's talk about, what to do about it, and maybe start from the other end of the telescope. Well, if something really bad happens, why did it happen, and what caused that really bad thing? I think the real risk here of serious enforcement penalties are where people make a change to what they're declaring to Customs and Border Protection, and they aren't prepared for defending that change. I mean, to some level, the tariffs are meant to change behaviors. They're meant to force companies, especially smaller companies, and I'm looking at some of the comments here in the attendee chat, who really, they don't have the resources to deal with this. They're trying to force changes in behavior. And to Angela's point about comparing this second administration to the first one, they're really not sympathetic anymore to what were arguments before about exceptions or exclusions. They even took down the process for applying for those in the steel and aluminum example. So what's going to drive those big cases are where there's something that just sounded too good to be true, and you went for it, and the DOJ or the Customs and Border Protection are going to disagree with your view of the risk. I don't think it's going to be driven into, maybe step ahead, Matt, into the False Claims Act discussion. I don't think it's going to be driven by instances where companies actually know that they're lying, right? And that is one element or one way knowledge can be shown by the DOJ. Where there's going to be those traps are where there are red flags that, with hindsight, after something bad has happened, the DOJ in particular takes a view, well, you were aware of or you were deliberately, you acted with deliberate, disregard or recklessness about what was happening, and you didn't do the due diligence to kind of show us otherwise. And if you compare that to some other areas of law where they articulate basically the same standard as high probability awareness, all that boils down to in practice is you have to look for red flags, you have to assess them, and you have to try to mitigate them before you go forward with a particular scheme or new way of declaring where you're getting goods from, or where there's substantial transformation, for example, and things like that. And so in that context where you're dealing with probabilities, we are all going to make mistakes. None of us are the intelligence community, although I've gone through all the attendees yet. None of us are the police. Many of us are not going to be financial institutions. So assuming you're going to make mistakes, how do you set up a system and a process where you are looking at your risks, you're drawing a line about where you're going to look harder at some things than you might at others, and you're going to look more at those other things? The slight good news in this is that allows companies, including smaller companies, to right size how many things they're looking more closely at and what it means to look more closely at something based on their resources. So it's not perfect. There's no guarantees to this, but I think like in other regulatory areas where you want to be 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when the current administration feels that you've deprived them of external revenue that they're counting on, you want to be able to say, well, yeah, we missed that. Shame on us. But here's all the other things we stopped, or here are the resources we had at the time. This is what we were looking at instead. And yes, we'll take our lessons learned and enhance our program based on this, what we just learned. You're also going to have to rely on tools and the support of vendors and other people providing those tools to you. Because, as those tools become more and more powerful, the government, fairly or not, will expect you to be able to look at more and more things.
So, I mean, this sounds like program effectiveness again. This sounds like, again, being able to build a case and being able to substantiate the claim that our program is effective and being able to show data and evidence that we are, mitigating risks in a meaningful way within our organization. So, this year alone, Matt, we've had a dozen conversations in different little pockets of FCPA thing changing and Federal Claims Act and this conversation. And I think if we zoom out of it, we can see that there is a through line for compliance people to take advantage of this volatility, as I was saying earlier. Our job is to have good sea legs. We have consistently throughout the beginning, since the beginning of our departments existing in the corporate landscape, had to manage and had to kind of ride all these different waves. This is just yet another different wave for us to ride. And I think the compliance people that I know are very good at getting smart on something quickly. And I think when we can get smart on something quickly and see how this new changing, landscape is intersecting with our specific business and the risks that it presents to that business, we can better again show up as a business person with a perspective on what we might be able to do from a Pareto principle, at least, because to Mike's point, we're never going to be perfect. But if we can show up from a Pareto principle perspective and say, okay, well, this is what's going to kind of extinguish the most risk most quickly, given what we know right now. And again, this could change again next week. It could change again next month. But that plan, do, check, act, that sort of continuous improvement cycle is what can allow us to add value to the business and be more proactive to help our company see around the curve, rather than again, sitting at that kiddie table and wringing our hands because we don't have enough resources. This is ours to take in terms of influence and impact, but it's going to take us kind of showing up a little bit different.
And that was the question that was kind of forming in my head there, Nick, as I was listening to Mike and Angela. Okay, for example, you might now need to document why you are changing a supplier or changing a value of something. Okay, so you'd need a policy, but how are you actually going to enforce this policy of more documentation? Or what other capabilities will compliance programs need to get better at to be able to navigate these sorts of new challenges? That's a question I think that compliance officers will need to think about. Bobby, I don't know if you could maybe answer that for us, at least in your experience. I guess I'll just put it that way. What do you think compliance teams will need to be good at to be able to navigate these kind of challenges now?
Sure. Is in-house counsel, compliance officer. I also rely on, kind of Matt and Angela, outside counsel. I've got really strong outside counsel, and, we bounce these back and forth because these issues back and forth, because they also are helping other clients and see multiple perspectives, not just mine, right? So I value that input. Both Angela and Mike, it's, documentation, I think, is the end result of having all the different elements that Angela talked about. Classification is something that's really important because that's on an import, getting that right along with value and the list that Angela, mentioned and even, Michael mentioned, is really important, because when you start making a change after April 2nd, but you used a different classification prior, that's a red flag, right? And that's one of those that you have the business may do or supply chain may do that. And we've got to pay attention because that's a compliance and risk management red flag. At the end of the day, none of us know how effective our compliance program is until Customs, DOJ, could be Commerce, Treasury, whoever the regulator is, until they tell you your compliance program's effective, you really don't know. You can put all the money, resources in, but when there's an enforcement action and you've got to demonstrate, until they say you're getting either a non-prosecution agreement, declination, whatever it might be, that's when you know it's effective because it stood up the test to the regulator. But if you meet all the elements, you break down the silos, you do invest in the tools, all of those, the paperwork, the documentation, all of those are effective elements in the event that you do get the letter bringing you to the table with the regulator.
All right. So along those lines, first, for everybody who's listening and submitting questions, I just want to say I see them, and I'm going to get to the questions maybe in about 5 or 6 more minutes. But I have a couple of other points I wanted to ask first. Thinking about enforcement, I have to wonder, and I'll put this to Mike and Angela, does the Justice Department, do they know what they're doing either? Because I feel like a lot of compliance teams are probably somewhat bewildered at the rapid pace of change right now and the erratic announcements from the administration. So I do also wonder, does the Justice Department actually know what it wants to do with enforcement? Do they know what a good tariff compliance regime would look like? It's a fair question, I think, because they've had a lot of layoffs, they've had a lot of turnover. Do they know what they're doing any more than we do or don't know what we're doing? Mike, what do you think? And then Angela.
Well, and I'll steal a little bit of Angela's thunder from our prep session, but tariff enforcement is nothing new to DOJ. The DOJ False Claims Act prosecutors have been bringing tariff-based actions for a long time. There's dozens of cases you can look at. There's precedent where they have successfully brought claims or supported whistleblowers' allegations about country of origin, about valuation declared, about substantial transformation. So from the line prosecutor perspective in DOJ, this is nothing new. They have a track record of this. If you also want to be a bit cynical, if you were in the DOJ and you're still in DOJ, you want to make a name for yourself, you want to be in good graces, export enforcement, sanctions enforcement, tariff enforcement is going to be a way to make a name for yourself. It's been declared by the head of the civil division recently as a priority. I think even the head of the criminal division talked about it. Some new DOJ policies have emphasized it. So I think they certainly know what they're doing, and frankly, will be getting pressure and have already gotten pressure from cabinet level officials and from the White House to be ready to bring these cases.
Okay. Angela, what's your take on this?
So I will echo some of what Mike said. I believe tariff enforcement for the DOJ side is number 2 only to immigration enforcement. Mm-hmm. So, it's certainly a very high priority with the administration. But I want to take a step back because there's a regulator in between DOJ, and that's Customs and Border Protection. So in addition to the possibility of a civil or criminal investigation through DOJ, there's the more bread and butter work that U.S. Customs does of reviewing every single entry. So that's a really important midpoint for companies to think about. So when you have a customs broker, or do you have 1, do you have 5, do you have 50? Because as customs brokers file entries for a company, Customs can respond and send inquiries or audit requests. And those are something else to think about, where you are building an administrative record of what you're saying to the government and responding to those inquiries, responding to those audit requests, and other information that could feed into a DOJ investigation. So thinking again from the perspective of a compliance team, if you have a lot of people in your organization, you have all these different functions, and someone's interfacing with your customs brokers, it's something I really commonly hear companies say, well, I have a customs broker, so they're handling all of our records. And that's not how it works. one of the first things you see in a customs broker engagement is that they are not responsible for your compliance and they are not responsible for your record keeping.
Exactly.
So as you think about interfacing with customs, it can become a really, really slippery slope really fast.
Yeah, it can many times be a false sense of security if we forget that liability rests with us, whether there's a third party involved or not. To your exact point. And so then it's like, well, what do we do? So maybe they know what they're doing, maybe they don't know what they're doing. Like, what do we do? What's our North Star? And I think, our North Star has to be something like a good faith effort. Like, if we're putting a good faith effort into trying to comply with these things and we're trying to build an effective program and we have ongoing risk assessments or, flexible policies that are being updated in a dynamic way, given the information we know and given the information that we're finding in the face of all this volatility. I think, again, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I think
you were really close. The standard's reasonable care.
What is it?
Reasonable care.
Okay.
But there's a lot that goes into that standard. So again, it's not just good faith to say we tried, but you have to understand what customs thinks reasonable care is for an importer.
Sure. And I'm just saying, if we're doing that and we can at least make the case, well, that's going to put us in a much different position than just kind of eyes closed, kind of shooting in the dark. I mean, these supply chains are so complex now, right? And that was shown kind of right after COVID, all these just-in-time things, inputs coming from different countries. It's a wildly complex network that companies have to, navigate through. And if we can at least provide that reasonable care, right? Like, at least be trying to strive toward that kind of a standard, and we're building documentation along the way, then should somebody come knocking, we're not going to be out over our skis. We're at least going to be we're at least going to have a stack of evidence that we can point to perhaps increase the odds of a declination or something like that.
So the last question I wanted to cover was, to what extent would any previous compliance efforts around, say, human trafficking, forced labor, or other exercises where you're trying to get visibility to all the way down your supply chain, that kind of sort of feels to me a lot like what we're talking about now. Where are these goods coming from? Well, to what extent would those skills around due diligence for, say, human trafficking or Uyghur imports from China, which are now illegal in the United States, or any of those other declarations, compliance teams play a role in that. Are those due diligence skills at all transferable over to what we're talking about here, trying to understand where these goods come from now? Are they not? Bobby, maybe I'll just start with you. Do you find that there's any muscle memory from other compliance stuff we have had to deal with before that's useful here? And then Angela, and then Mike, what do you see as well? But Bobby, what would you say to that?
Well, without a doubt, they're transferable, and that muscle memory takes me back to the FCPA days and enhancing programs where you can't outsource your corruption, right, to third parties. So you got to be careful of how you manage your customs brokers. I think there was a question in the chat box about, can't keep up with the paperwork and importer of record. Well, if you use a third party, you still have to monitor them, manage them. That takes time and effort. I'm about preventative medicine in compliance, not reactive, because you'll spend a factor of 10, 20, 30 dealing with the heart attack when it happens, which is enforcement, if we can try to be preventative. But they do all these issues, in order to have an effective compliance program, they all intertwine, they all connect. But due diligence is a very important element to an effective compliance program. Michael talked about tools. You can't do everything manually. You can't keep up with tariff rate changes manually. So you need these tools, these service providers that do that. But I mean, it's having a dashboard that looks at every bit of risk and operationally, and bring it all together so that the different departments talk.
Yeah.
Versus, I'm a big silo. How do we bring down the silos, and how do we connect to manage that risk?
And then Angela, and then Mike, give me your thoughts on that same idea of how much can supply chain due diligence moves, you already know, I mean, do they fit here in this context too, do you think?
I mean, certainly you can find a new supplier. And I would agree that all of these tools, your Uyghur forced labor screening tools, those are really helpful for just validating where your supply chain is. But it's the tariff analysis is going to have to take some of that work and take it to the next level. So I think the more that you can, within your company, figure out what's going to be high value. Either it's, your top shipments, it's a really high value product. So it's going to catch customs eye because it's $1 million shipment coming in, and try and focus your resources on where you would have the most impact from your business by a surprise change. And then figuring out ways to stay on top of all the changes as well.
That's a great point.
Mike, what would you say?
Maybe two specific things to add. Whenever you talk about supply chain due diligence or KYS, know your supplier, the question is always, well, I have 100,000 suppliers. So how far do I have to go? And do I have to look at my supplier's supplier? All the way down, it's a question that comes up repeatedly, whether it's your FLIPA, forced labor generally, business and human rights considerations. I like to think about it as another opportunity to make and defend risk-based decisions. And it may depend on your industry, your product line. What were you doing historically? Has something changed dramatically recently? That would be something you'd want to look at. And so, again, it's not a science. You're not going to get it perfectly right. You're exercising in subjective judgments all the time. I saw a comment in the chat about maintaining your professional judgment. You can't outsource that. That's absolutely true. It's hard to exercise it, but that is the reality of the enforcement risk that you might face. If you have that feeling, we've all been there, you have that feeling, you're like, gosh, should I say something? It's going to cause a problem. I might be wrong. Many times you regret not having at least raised your hand and asked. And so I think, use a risk-based process. It can be very simple. Pick 3 or 4 basic criteria on data that you have to help you draw those lines about where you may go further down than other places. The other aspect that I would talk about, just to add on to what's already been said, is that it is important where you decide you look further, or especially if you are responding to an allegation from a whistleblower. Remember, they could become a key TAM relator in a False Claims Act case. Mm-hmm. You want to handle that in a very careful way. Make sure that you're making decisions about whether you think an allegation is substantiated, or especially if you're responding to letters from the government, whether it's CBP, whether it's DOJ, make sure you're making decisions based on reliable inputs, reliable data. If you're just going to ask for another certification from your supplier who used to be in the Uyghur province in China, but now says they're in Malaysia, you could get 10 of those, you get 100 of those. It's not going to help you. There's policies from Homeland Security and Commerce in that particular context where they won't rely, on audits or assessments done inside mainland China because of the intimidation and coercion that they think happens there. So your own data is what you have the best control.
Oh, looks like Mike froze up there.
He's like keeping us waiting here. He's keeping us in anticipation here. I want to hear how that sentence ended. Go ahead.
Nick, I don't know if you have any other thoughts here, but I'm also struck by the fact that we overlooked there are whistleblower possibilities here. So yet again, it's all about keeping every employee on the same page with the company, and you want them to speak up to you. And there's a lot of just corporate culture 101 stuff. What else do you think of?
Well, I mean, that's what I was kind of keying in on. I mean, again, this flavor du jour, this tariffs thing is just a different sort of facet of this shape of risk management, or this shape of risk that we have to juggle within our organizations, and we cannot do this stuff alone. Bobby was saying the same thing before, right? He was saying, we have to be integrated. It has to be cross-functional. And the more people that we can get involved in this risk management apparatus, give them a voice, give them the clarity of being able to speak up about what we care about, the better the better the odds are that we're going to get some of that risk intelligence that we can respond to. Again, to what end is what I'm always asking. Why does this stuff matter? I think it matters because it's incumbent on us to help our organizations create the circumstances for more compliant behavior. And that's not just in the context of our code of conduct. It's also in the context of how we do business and how we interact with our suppliers and how we navigate through all these changing regulations and tariffs and so forth. So the more we can do to bring folks into that risk management process and be kind of on the team, and the better we're able to gather that risk intelligence, the more we're able to, as Mike said, take advantage of this opportunity to defend these risk-based decisions that we're making for the organization. But again, if we're just in this silo and we're just doing it all in theory, we're not going to be able to really move the needle in an effective way.
And if I could jump in real quick, Nick, you talked about code of conduct, right? Part of the advice that I give as in-house counsel is never put anything in writing that you can't live up to, whether it's the code of conduct or a due diligence policy or a trade compliance policy, because the words are great. And you talked about culture. One of the most powerful slides I saw 20-something years ago was culture trumps compliance, and it was the cover of Enron's code of conduct. They had all the great words. So if you have this due diligence policy that looks wonderful, but your organization isn't living up to it, I mean, that is one of the red flags and things that in DOJ, Commerce, Treasury, CBP, they hone in on. So don't put anything in writing that you cannot live up to.
I wanted to sneak in one last question from a listener who expressly says, question for the attorneys. So I guess I'll put it to Angela first and then Mike. At the end of the year, what do you think auditors will be looking at? What will they be looking for? And how should compliance folks help? Angela, what would you say maybe in like 1 minute or so, 60 seconds?
CBP auditors are looking all the time. There's no year end. It's a rolling basis. So you need to look really carefully at the data that you're submitting to customs and making sure that you can back it up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is this something external auditors would also look at, like as part of a financial statement audit or an internal controls review? Does it come up like that too?
I mean, I don't think it's been a huge issue, but now it's material for everybody, right? If you're dealing with companies or countries, suppliers in countries that are subject to these tariffs. So I would expect your statutory auditors, your internal auditors, your external auditors to all be looking at that, especially if you have a significant swing in what you're doing or what you're declaring. I think auditors should be kind of pinpointing those things to look at.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, this is becoming it's an increased risk tied to this, and that materiality threshold can change significantly depending on what that business is. That's a great point.
I would also wonder to what extent your own customers might be looking to you, company, to be able to demonstrate you have all of your tariff issues squared away. I don't know if you're a freight forwarder or something like that, or I don't know, but I'm just trying to think of, we all are somebody else's third party. And the more that you can demonstrate to your third parties that your compliance risks are well in hand, you become more attractive to them than those third parties who cannot demonstrate that. But that said, we're pretty much at the end of the hour. Nick, I don't know if you had any other closing thoughts or if you just want to wrap it up. But before we get to that, Bobby Butler, Mike Huneke, Angela Gamalski, you give us great stuff to cover here. You covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much.
I mean, this is why I love the ethics verse. Let's get a massive emoji explosion for these guys. I mean, this is why I love it every single week. I feel like I learn so much. And Matt, thank you for putting this session together. Absolutely follow Matt on LinkedIn. Definitely follow. Definitely check out his page daily, please. Radical Compliance. There's always great information coming out from there, and follow these folks on LinkedIn as well. We have one more session before the most amazing day of your life, Ethics Verse Day 2.0, which is going to be next Thursday. We're going to be talking, like I said, we have a session about whistleblowers and the mind of a whistleblower. We have a session about AI, actual applications. This thing is moving so fast. Some of you guys don't even know what AI agents are. So we're going to really learn about how we can help our organizations navigate through that. We got a session with DOJ alums who are going to be talking about what DOJ actually cares about. And then we're going to wrap the day up with a phenomenal session with the one and only Hema Lomax talking about mindset. You know, I'm always talking about this inflection point that we're at right now, and it's on us to change the course of our fate. We have to grab the steering wheel of our lives and of our careers, and that happens every single day within our organization on how our department interacts with the rest of the business and how we can add more value. So this is such an exciting time to be alive. Hope you guys can join us next Tuesday for a phenomenal session, and next Thursday, if you can't attend them all, take that PTO, because we got a lot of great prizes, a lot of free CEUs, and hope to see you there. So spread the word. I put a little something in the chat if you want to share that to increase this community. This is really our greatest asset as we try to scale this mountain of risk. So love you all. See you next week.